Hi everyone and welcome to the AkzoNobel Investor Update on Growth and Deliver. My name is Marije and I'll be your moderator today, and thank you all so much for being here and for taking the time to learn more about AkzoNobel. Now please note that the presentation slides as well as a replay of today's event will be made available on the website AkzoNobel.com. Now let's have a look at what we have in store for you today. We will start with an overview of where the company currently stands, and then we'll zoom in on AkzoNobel's plans for growth. And part of that journey, of course, is the strategy for sustainable innovation. After a 10-minute break, we'll go into the second part of the strategy and we'll focus on how AkzoNobel will deliver the financial improvements in the coming years. Next, we're going to have a look at capital allocation, and then we'll take another short break and a recap, and then it's time for the interactive part of today's session, and this is the Q&A where we would like to hear from you. Just a small disclaimer. I would like to draw your attention to the safe harbor statement and the disclaimer. Both apply to this event, including the presentations as well as the Q&A. Now, this is a full program, as you can see, so let me get started by introducing today's speakers. And I think most of you will already be familiar with CEO Thierry van Lancker and the CFO Maarten de Vries. In addition to them, you will also be hearing from Michael Friede, who joined AkzoNobel as Chief Commercial Officer for Performance Coatings last year in July. And Michael joined from Covestro and Bayer, where he worked for 20 years, and most recently he was responsible for the business unit Coatings, Adhesives and Specialties. Now, a person with a long track record at AkzoNobel is Klaus Khaldhov. He holds a PhD in organic chemistry from Amsterdam University, and he's been with the company since 1984. He is AkzoNobel's Chief Technology Officer since 2017. And last but not least, I would also like to welcome Karen Marie Catholm, who joined AkzoNobel last September 2021 as Chief Integrated Supply Chain Officer. And Karen Marie comes from DuPont, where she was the Integrated Operations Leader for DuPont Nutrition and Biosciences. She has over 20 years of experience at various large and international food manufacturers, such as Orkla, United Biscuits, and Arla Foods. I would now like to start things off and invite Thierry to the stage to kick off this event by setting the stage.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening also from my side, and a very warm welcome to this event. It's about 2 years ago since we last had an investor update, and that was in fact in exactly February 2020, when we were still kidding about a little virus that was detected somewhere and was never going to hit us. So 2 years later, it's probably appropriate to give you an update on where we are and where we're going with the company. Let's start, like in every good session, from the very beginning, for those who don't know us very well, and then to sketch out where we are on the journey and then dive into the gory details to get you to the bridge on 2023. For those of you who know us somewhat less, we are a 9.6 billion euro company. We have about half of our business in Europe, Middle East, Africa, about 30% in Asia, and 20% in the Americas. You can see the data here, and we have about 33,000 proud colleagues in the company. We do believe that we have the strongest brands in the industry, and in fact you will see that for a company that is 230 years old, we are reinventing ourselves, and hopefully to your liking. This is the hard data, but of course the real heart of the company sits in the purpose statement. We've been chiseling and modifying this over the couple of last years, but frankly, this is where we landed. The purpose for the company, which is an engine, not only just to feel good, but to drive the business, is people, planet, paint. People, obviously, everything to do with how we operate in our communities, everything to do with safety, health, environmental items for our people, but also how we really thrive on diversity, inclusion, and how we manage the talent and our workers. Planet is deep in the DNA of the company. It is using sustainability, again, not as a boundary for what we do, but as basically a driver for getting to stronger results, but more on that later. And of course, paint. The company has a long legacy on inventing many categories over the 2 centuries that existed, but we want to be at the forefront to really bring the newest, the highest performing products at the highest quality and with the highest service levels for our customers. People, planet, paint is our purpose statement. It's easy to remember, even for people like myself, but it's really a rallying cry for our organization, really around the world. Where are we in our industry and what is our industry? The paints market, the paints and coatings market, is about a 140 billion euro market worldwide. About half of that market is being occupied by the top 12 companies that you see here. That means that the other 70 billion or so from the market is really taken by literally thousands of companies in all sorts of special corners, decorative, specialty coatings, etc., etc. So there is a lot of opportunity still for consolidation, but as always, when there are lots of opportunities, it's also how you make the choice and which choices you don't make that define where you have success and don't have success. In this whole market, AkzoNobel is the 3rd largest company worldwide, and you've seen what our footprint is, and frankly has been spending a lot of time on getting the muscles in place to keep thriving and working on the bottom line. The journey from 2017. In 2017, it's probably fair to say that the company was a promising teenager hanging on the couch at home, eating potatoes and drinking beverages, whining about how much talent that was unrecognized, and spending a lot of time explaining why not versus why it could. I think these graphs are pretty self-explanatory. We embarked back then on 15 by 20 by promising to deliver 15% return on sales by our businesses by 2020. And despite a huge curveball that was thrown with the pandemic, we delivered 15 by 20. And you see how we came here from a couch potato whining about why the world didn't recognize us, although we did a lot of innovations, to really getting aligned, starting to work on the basics, on processes and systems, and frankly catching up with the best in our industry. And we didn't do that in the sweatshop fashion. Next to it is our Organization Health Index that we religiously have been doing every quarter, and where our employees can voluntarily participate in a survey on how they feel, how things are going in the company. If I go back to 2017-2018, the participation rate was low, and we scored about 56 in this metric. Today, 86% of our employees are participating, from a salesperson in Brazil all the way to an operator in China, and the satisfaction score is 72, which is an all-time high for the company, but is also extremely high for a manufacturing industrial company like we are. So 15 by 20 was getting the couch potato teenager out of the sofa, get him or her in the gym, starting to work out, create muscles, systems, processes, really starting to do the mandates on which segments do we want to be in and where not, really starting to get serious and really driving ourselves into the front of the group and really being, having the right muscle to perform. So now we're at 2021, and in fact, as I said, the pandemic, of course, in our industry has been an enormous roller coaster, from markets that were severely down in 2020, mostly on the performance coating side, to markets that were unexpectedly up, like for example in the decorative market in EMEA, to everything in between, raw materials in excess availability, and then in 2021 all the reverse, demand coming back, but the raw materials, inflation not being available, etc. Despite all of that, we landed in 2021 exactly where we hoped and where we wanted to be on our journey to 2023. We landed at 1.44 billion euros of adjusted EBITDA, almost the same EBIT number as we had last year, despite having to absorb 770 million euros of raw material expenses. But that is on what happened until yesterday. This is all about going to 2023. As you know, we've pledged, just like in fashion of 15 by 20, to go to the next trip of or next leg of our journey, getting the company to 2 billion EBITDA in 2023, adjusted EBITDA, and also promising 150 basis points increase in our return on sales versus where we were in 2020. And we're doing that not by just the muscular gym work as we did on 15 by 20, but really starting to use the body that we have created, really getting in the game, on the field, and to compete with the best, because we think we have some good assets there to do. So all of our conversation in the next couple of hours is really around how are we going to deliver the 2023 number. And I apologize in advance. We will try to take you into the fine art of paint making, because that's where we feel there's still a lot on the table. Maarten and I have been boring some of you in our one-on-one visits to talk about, well, we're halfway the journey. Well, exactly this chart shows we're halfway the journey, and let us now give you a first look at how the rest of the journey looks like. What we'll attempt to do in this session is really to bring you the bridge. You know, we like bridges. There's a lot of water in the Netherlands. You have to have bridges to get across it. And by the way, if I would forget it, our CFO is a bridge maniac, so he would actually try to get everything into a bridge that he can get his hands on. From the 1.44 billion to the 2 billion euro EBITDA, these are the building blocks that we're going to go into much more detail. About 350 million of the bottom line, the EBITDA impact, will come from the growth section. About 200 will come from the deliver results, really getting under the hood of the car, really starting to see how we can get the self-inflicted complexity and inefficiencies out of the system. A couple of words on the growth segment. If you will research the predicted growth for our markets by companies like Orr and Boss, you will find that the compounded average growth rate for our markets is about 8%. You will see throughout the presentation that we've basically taken a haircut on all those numbers and bring it back to 6%. So all the growth, market growth numbers that you will see in the presentation are not taking the Orr and Boss numbers, which add up to 8%, but actually goes to the 6%. And why did we do that? Well, times are always pretty turbulent. A plan that only gets you to the 2 billion, if all goes according to plan, is probably not strong enough. So we took a haircut on those numbers. Instead of the 8, we brought it back 25% to 6% growth, to really take into account potential issues around inflation, potential pricing elements that we may have to give in, and really bring it back on a conservative case to try to get to the 2 billion. So the big block here, the first big block, is really around the compounded average growth rate. And in fact, what we see in our markets, it is on track a bit more with the Orr and Boss numbers, but we still have kept the haircut in place. And of course, the margin initiatives, it's probably broader than pricing initiatives, the margin initiatives to keep working on the margin expansion over the next 2 years. Last but not least, in the growth revenue element, there's also the growth in the segments where we're particularly high growth and where we have a particular strong position. So in the next session, we'll walk you through some of these areas with some videos on how we're doing and how we in fact are delivering on what we told you in the February 2020 session. On the deliver results part, you'll see an enabler, product management, being mentioned, and then all the details around what we're doing in our end-to-end integrated supply chain. Product management, more on that of course later, but product management was only able to be put in place after we put all our ERP systems in place, having our organizations reset, a different operating model, getting the capabilities in place, really starting to get track on where we are, and this will be an enormous complexity reduction factor and therefore an enabler for us. With this, we get to 2 billion. And in fact, there is wiggle room over and above it. So there is, of course, an up and a downside. I know what you're going to ask around the downside. Well, if there's a macroeconomic collapse, well, of course, there's no plan that sustains. But we feel very confident on delivering the 2 billion EBITDA going forward. And why do we feel confident? Because it's fair to say that the whining teenager on the sofa has reinvented him or herself. And this is a chart that we are particularly proud of in Amsterdam. If you look how long it took us in the previous raw material inflation cycle to get above the line, so where our price increases were offsetting the raw material increases, it took us almost a year and a half. First of all, it took us a year to wake up, and it took us another 6 to 9 months to frankly get above the line and offset the raw materials. Although back then the headwind was serious, it was frankly dwarfed by what happened in 2021. If you now look at that muscle that we have developed on what happened in the Grow and Deliver in 2021, it is fair to say that in our whole industry that was severely impacted by raw material inflation, we were the first to react, and we were the most principled and the most determined to react. So the new AkzoNobel est arrivé, as they say for some French wines, that means that within a year we will be in this quarter on top of our game again and having offset the raw material inflation. A true testimonial on how the AkzoNobel worldwide team has waken up from the sofa in the gym and is now using the muscles in Grow and Deliver to deliver.
Well, thank you very much, Thierry, for starting us off. I would like to invite you to join me here at the table so we can continue to talk a bit more about where AkzoNobel currently stands. Hi, Thierry. Thank you for joining me here at the table. It really looks like AkzoNobel has gone to quite the transformation in the last years, and it's really an impressive improvement of profitability that you showed us. Where would you say, I wonder, is the key cultural change between your earlier plan, 15 by 20, and your current strategy, Grow and Deliver?
I would say, the biggest difference is, as I try to put in an analogy, is in fact the muscle building was in 15 by 20. It was around the heavy lifting around cost. It was putting ERP systems in. It was getting processes in place. A lot of capability building, but also capability exchanging. A lot of the heavy lifting. Now it's, and in fact, I would say we were very not so much focused on growing the company. It was really on getting ourselves into
the basics
shape.
right. Yep.
And now it's really to use those tools to really grow, defend, attack, really being assertive in the market. And at the same time, don't lose the discipline on our internal complexity reduction and hygiene.
Right. And why would you say, Thierry, is this raw material pricing cycle different from previous ones?
Well, first of all, the order of magnitude was completely different. On it.
Yeah.
I think we were already devastated when it was single-digit increases. Now we had more than 30% raw material increase in a year.
Yeah.
For businesses in paints and coatings that are typically around 50% margin, that is a huge shock to go through. So that was a big change, the speed and the size with which came rolling in. But I think for what AkzoNobel is concerned, I do believe that we surprised friends and enemies, but sometimes also ourselves, on how we really, in a very methodical way, with the data that we now have in hands, have been pushing for a timeline to get at par. So I think that decisiveness is probably the biggest difference.
The key to success. Okay, thank you very much, Thierry. We'll be hearing from you later on.